Yes, resistance. As we were lying here, I was thinking what a wonderful place it is for me to be able to give this talk. Can you hear me in the back?
A little louder.
Louder, okay. Can I turn this? Can I turn it up? Or? Okay. There are many faces here that I've known for many years. We've been through many experiences together, and I know that inspired talk or uninspired talk, they will still love me, and I will love them. And I see some faces that are sort of familiar, and I think of maybe they've put their toe in the water here, and then an ankle, and now they're maybe waiting, discovering what might be here for them. And then new faces, and you are the explorers who, without having to pay for airfare, have ventured into a new land. Wong Gong told me I could pick the flowers out for this weekend, and she would arrange them. I have loved looking at these flowers. To me, there's a creaminess to them, creamy white, and I thought of cream and like putting a stick in cream, how it barely moves and then it settles, and that cream's true nature is really peaceful. I gave the talk here yesterday morning, and that's like giving it in Peoria before it comes to Broadway. And afterwards I asked Wong Gong if she had any suggestions for improving it, and she only had one, it was articulate. 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 So 2 weeks ago, Reverend Wong Gong asked me how my talk was going. I said, good. I already had a revision of my rough draft. She asked me what was my topic. I said it was explaining how having a problem might only be a concept. As I started to elaborate, she interrupted me and said, Nate, do you have a problem? I had not anticipated this response. And I stammered a bit before saying, well, no, not really. To which she replied, well, then why are you talking about problems? Perhaps a different topic would be better. I thought, well, no, not really. It would not be better. She said, well, you used to get very nervous about these talks, but not so much anymore. Why not talk about that? The next day, I was peevish. I thought the talk I'd already done was good enough. I did not want the extra work of starting over. What I wanted was resistance, struggle. And yeah, so what I wanted, and then whoosh, it let me go. Surrender. This was not about what I wanted. So I turned to her suggestion. It's true, I do feel more comfortable about these talks, safer. So I thought, well, what makes people safe? Maybe that could be a good topic. I was able to come up with several examples, and within a couple of hours I had an outline. The next day, after Dharma class, I told Reverend I had heard her suggestion and would give a talk about what makes people safe. A troubled look crossed her happy countenance. She said, you come up with these wonderful big ideas, but then you tend to get lost in them and it can be confusing. How about giving a talk on the little passage we just read? Well, no. No, I don't want to begin again. I don't want to give a talk on what we just read. I want to give a significant talk about a profound truth, a home run, not some little single on some little passage. Once again, I was all resistance, wanting to do it my way and suffering for it. But then I recalled the passage, which Drew was kind enough to read. The Master said, knowledge and self-awakening are different. If self-awakening does not follow from knowledge, one will be nothing more than a slave to knowledge. Right then, self-awakening happened. Inside I heard, relax, you're safe, nothing is wrong. And whoosh, all the resistance and fear collapsed. I saw that I had been trying to build a big, impressive house. But I heard Reverend Wonkong saying, we're not all that interested in looking at your nice house. We'd rather walk with you on the path of discovery. I wondered why this change had been so difficult for me. I realized to a degree my plan had been to feel in control and safe behind the knowledge I had already accumulated. My resistance was to Reverend Wonkong, who, knowingly or unknowingly, had taken away my knowledge clothes and left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. I knew then that the house had to be torn down to its foundation, where I would find the open heart space for our walk together today. Jesus, take the wheel. And you know, I actually thought of saying Buddha, take the wheel, because of where we are, but then I thought Buddha probably would just sit there, and I would hit the guardrail. But Jesus is very compassionate. He's gonna. So that will be today's wee little talk, that knowledge without self-awakening is limited. As for all that writing I did that will never get used, I've decided to call it journaling. 6 years ago when I first started coming here, if I had a religion, it would have been science. If someone had spoken to me then about self-awakening, I might have equated it to intuition or insight. Had they persisted and said it was something prior to thinking and beyond time and space, I imagine I would have said, get back to me when you've got it under a microscope. But what interests me most now is the question, who am I? And what is the nature of my experience? As far as I can tell, science has nothing to say about this. Were I to use science to discover the luminosity of my own being, the light at the end of the tunnel, I believe all science could do would be to build more tunnel. For me, that is the difference between knowledge and self-awakening. Self-awakening, which is the same as awakening to who you are, awakening to your deeper self. Knowledge is good for building tunnels. Awakening requires leaving the tunnel altogether. A few years ago, before one of these talks, how's my articulation? Could be better. I decided to tell Reverend Wonkong, RWG in here, how anxious I had felt about giving the talk. I had read plenty about anxiety, had techniques for staying calm, but this knowledge had not helped much. Instead of once again trying to figure out what was wrong with me, I chose instead to turn to Reverend Wonkong and confess my inadequacy. Telling her was not book learning. It was real, and it was not easy, and I felt tears of shame on my cheek. She listened, then said, I had no idea this was so difficult for you. Then she laughed and patted me on the shoulder. And that was it. Nothing more was said. As I stood to leave, whoosh, self-awakening, suddenly I felt free and easy and buoyant. To put it into words, I would say that she showed me that my anxiety was no big deal, no judgment from her, no cause for shame. And apparently I trusted she was right. It was as if I had been in a little boat being tossed by big waves, and Reverend Wonkong was watching from safe ground. I had expected her to be very concerned about my dire circumstances, maybe jump into the boat and help me start bailing. Instead, she said, "Nate, I think your boat is sinking. Why don't you get out and stand over here with me?" This summer, I was at a week-long event when my uh-oh alarm went off regarding one of the attendees. I noticed this was someone with poor boundaries who was overly talkative, overly familiar, even a bit intrusive. So I knew to steer clear. Yet, by the end of the day, while others had escaped, I was the one he had glommed onto. The next day, things got worse. He suggested we get together for coffee after the conference. This really wound me up. I knew I did not want him as a friend, but I also did not want to hurt his feelings. The old story of myself is sometimes timid and too nice began playing its tune. I spent much of the day thinking about what to do. Self-judgment arose in me that despite having learned about boundaries when studying psychiatry, mine were still weak and porous. I decided it was high time to strengthen my boundaries and patch some holes. But sitting in meditation that night, try as I might, I could find no actual boundary to fortify. Something told me it was time to stop building tunnel, time to stop looking for an answer, time to drop my resistance to just having this experience, to drop the belief that there was something wrong with him or with me, and instead open myself to the wisdom that I knew could only arise from stillness. As I sat quietly, whoosh, something totally unexpected expanded into the stillness. Feelings of love and compassion for this man. I realized they had always been there, quiet and strong, but obscured by all the angst and the mental busyness. As it became absolutely clear to me that I actually did love this fellow being, waves of tenderness washed through me for his innocence, for his hopes to be happy, for his clumsiness, and for his suffering. Everything in me relaxed. All the worry and anxiety, any need to know what to do or say dissipated. I knew everything would be okay. More than okay. Wonderful, generous, confident, and safe for both of us. No need for protection. No need for rejection. No boundaries to be fortified, no boundaries to be breached. The next morning when I saw him, I felt friendly and affectionate, and we chatted easily and laughed together. This was possible because I knew nothing would happen that I did not want to happen. I knew I would do nothing to betray my own loving inner being. That day he made a point of sitting next to me. As it turned out, I needed to move to another row. When I was collecting my things, he said, "Oh, are we moving?" Rather than experiencing this as intrusive, I found it incredibly sweet. I saw that what had actually attracted him to me was not my weak boundaries, it was my kindness. I was so grateful I had not tried to push him away. Were he to ask me again to meet for coffee, I understood that I would feel appreciation for this gesture of friendship, and that love would find the right answer and deliver it with care and respect and genuine goodwill. The quote, which Drew read, "If self-awakening does not follow from knowledge, one will be nothing more than a slave to knowledge. Had I not known about the possibility of self-awakening, I could have further decorated my room with more knowledge about boundaries, but I would have remained stuck inside that room. A year ago, I was hiking with a friend in the mountains. We got back to our Airbnb about 9 p.m. and I alighted briefly in his downstairs room, then told him I was feeling tired and thought I would go upstairs to my bedroom. He said, "Would you be interested in exploring what you mean by tired?" He's a wise man. I said, "Very much so. I often say it or feel it, and I believe it a call to remove myself from the company of others and lie down." My friend asked, "What part of you is tired? Is it your muscles or perhaps shortness of breath from our hike?" I said, "No, nothing like that." He asked, "Well then, what tells you that you are tired?" I wasn't really sure, but as I scanned my body, there was some warmth and tingling around my eyes that I believe signified not having slept well. Slight tightness in my temporal muscles, not quite a headache, mild uneasiness in my abdomen. He suggested that I remove the tired label, which I had assigned to those sensations, along with its implication of something being wrong, and instead explore the sensations themselves with no agenda to get rid of them. So I got quiet, cleared my mind, and allowed those mild sensations to be, instead of trying to avoid them or distract myself as usual. I noticed the sensations were actually pleasurable. Gradually, I opened to what those raw sensations had to say to me, and that was peace. Be at peace. My friend asked, "Can you be peaceful here with me, or do you need to be by yourself?" Whoosh. Suddenly, I clearly saw that peace was not more plentiful upstairs than downstairs, not more plentiful if I was horizontal compared to vertical, or alone than with a friend. I realized that peace was what I am, my true nature. I just had to open to it. Tired was a code word that ego used so I wouldn't catch it, fearfully protecting itself. It was how ego tricked me from being vulnerable and fully present. Presence, the only truly safe place, a place where ego cannot go and of which it knows not. Tired was ego's game to keep me from knowing who I truly am, inherently safe, fully present, always at peace. A few months later, at the end of Sunday service, I was feeling tired, and I went straight to my car. Sitting there, I realized what was happening, and I forced myself to resist this compelling habit and go back into the lobby. On my way back, I passed a friend and his wife, who had seemed surprised to see me coming in. I decided to be vulnerable and explain to them that I did not want to buy into my tired story, so was returning to chat. One of them said, "You know, I do the same thing." And we had a wonderfully connected, frank, warm conversation that left me totally untired. Then I remembered there was something meaningful I had meant to share with another friend, and turned around, and he was standing right there. We went outside and were so grateful for the opportunity to sit in the sunlight together. Feeling lighthearted and free, we began laughing. Someone else heard our laughter and joined us, saying it was a balm for their troubled mind, and soon we were all laughing together. Then Reverend April, on her way back to the residence, stopped and stood with us for a while, appreciating the affinity and affection. Then Reverend Ginger stopped to visit with us, and finally Reverend Wongong, everyone enjoying the blessing of easy camaraderie. All made possible when I declined ego's invitation into a fearful contraction into my tired story. Instead, I had surrendered to the miracle of presence, and lo and behold, whoosh, found myself standing on safe ground right next to Reverend Wongong. Thank you.